Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or your first video here, I don't know. Welcome if you're new here, welcome either way. This is going to be my quite late now April wrap up for 2023. Mainly it's late because I was having trouble with my March one. Like, I downloaded it from my editing app and apparently half the video didn't have sound, so I had to spend some time sorting all of that out. But I have quite a few books to talk to you about, mostly 4 or 5 stars, which I'm very glad about. However, I did start off with some DNFs of the month, and I'm going to start there. Firstly, we have Kitsuna. Now, this is the bind-up edition, so this will have, I think, 2 volumes. This is volume 4. I decided to find volume 1 just on the internet to see if I wanted to continue, and I decided not to. I think that the cover art, I don't know if it was like done later on, but I don't think that the cover art really displayed what the art was going to be like inside. I thought that the plot was a little bit basic and didn't really grab my attention, so I decided not to continue with that. Next we have another comic, and that is Tagamibachi Volume 1. So I read this a while ago and then was collecting all the other volumes in order to finish the series, and when I went back to read this one, it's just not what I'm really into with comics at the moment. So this follows a fantasy futuristic world where places have become very isolated and the population is very low in between locations of human habitation, and it's very dangerous to travel between its settlements. And we are following essentially like a postal service, but instead of being like our usual postal service, it's the people who are trusted with going in between these settlements. And we're following one of these people, and the package that they pick up ends up being a small child. So this was interesting to me at the time when I first read it, but just didn't appeal to me now, so I decided not to finish it. Next we have one that I was super anticipating, and that is Reign of the Fallen. Now this is sort of pitched as bisexual necromancers fantasy. It sounded really good. However, when I started reading it, I just found that what was taking me out of the story was the lack of the professionalism from these characters, with how much weight and gravity was put on their role. I think that it probably wouldn't have bothered a younger reader, but that disparity was really bugging me in the actual reading experience, so I decided not to continue with that one. And next we have one that I literally just picked up on a whim because it was labelled lesbian on my audiobook app, and that is The Dragon and Her Thief. This was pretty stupid and pretty bad. I just felt like a light fun read, but this was sort of too stupid for what I wanted at the time, so I don't have much to say about this one. I didn't get very far through it. It's not very good, and I'm moving on. So next I have one 3-star, and that is The Lieutenant of Ishmael. Now this is a play about how to describe this? A very violent man absolutely loves his cat. His cat is sort of the one place of solace he has in his life. His family is looking after the cat, and the cat ends up getting killed, and it's about them trying to cover it up before he finds out that there is anything wrong. Now, this play is a comedy, and I think that a lot of the comedy comes from the visual comedy, and so I think that a lot of that was lost in the reading of it, as I've never seen it in person. Also, I just think that this wasn't the style of comedy that really works for me. I read this with a couple of friends and we did really enjoy it, but I also found that in the writing of it, it's written with a very thick accent, so it's quite difficult to read out loud if you're not familiar with the accent itself. And I think that was good because it gives the actor the opportunity to see how all of the lines were supposed to be read, but it was just a very difficult and clunky reading experience, hence why I gave it a 3. Next I have a couple of 3.5 stars. First of all, Of Iron and Gold. Again, this was when I was kind of in the mood for something silly and fun. This one is a lesbian shifter romance and it was quite short. It was rather ridiculous and I really don't have much to say about this. I don't necessarily recommend it unless lesbian shifter romances are your thing, but it was fine. And another one of these, I wanted something fun and silly, is a comic called No Way Vampires Don't Exist. This one, again, it was a fun read. It is about a guy who comes to live with these 4 other guys all at university, and he slowly starts to work out that all the guys that are in this house are vampires, and about the relationship that all of these people get into. I thought it was cute and sweet and had some very funny moments, but it wasn't like super memorable. It didn't like blow me out of the water, hence the rating. So I'm now going to move on to books I enjoyed far more and into my 4 stars. The first of which I'm pretty sure I have a copy of, so I'm going to look for that. Okay, that took way too long. I have Once and Future by Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy. So this is a futuristic sci-fi retelling of the Legend of King Arthur, and I really enjoyed this one. I'm not a huge history buff when it comes to the knowledge of the Legend of King Arthur, but I think that this went into enough of the lore around it that you can still enjoy it without having that much prior knowledge. I also think that the pairing of the sci-fi setting and the King Arthur legend came across really well. I don't think it was a weird mishmash of those two things. I also found that this had a lot of really great diversity representation. The main character is, I can't remember whether or not she's bi or pansexual. I know that she has relationships or interest in people from multiple genders, and Merlin is also gay. There's a non-binary character, so there's a lot of representation in here, and it managed to be a very fun read while also tackling some more serious topics and talking about expectations that are placed on you by others. It's about kids being separated from their parents and having to carve out an existence for themselves. It's about standing up against a corrupt regime. It's just a very, very good story, and I do intend to continue on in this series. I have to get a stack going so that I can have my little thumbnail shot at the end of filming. This one I thought I had a copy of, but I don't. And that is the final book in the Grisha Trilogy, Ruin and Rising. I don't have volume 3, so I don't know why I thought I did. So, I also gave this one 4 stars. I thought it was a very good conclusion to the trilogy. I won't go into too much about what this book contains because I think it will spoil the first 2, but if you haven't heard, Shadow and Bone is about a world where some people are born with magic, some people aren't. Those people who are born with magic are sought out so that they can be trained and to a certain extent controlled as well. And the trilogy follows these 2 orphans, one of whom is born with magic, one of whom isn't. And the girl who is born with magic, Alina, manages to slip under the radar when people are collecting all the children, and her magic is not found out until later on in her life when it has disastrous consequences. So I was surprised when a lot of people were saying they were incredibly disappointed by this 3rd and final book, because I thought that the writing didn't have a dip in quality. It was still very tension filled, and I think that everything worked out as sort of best as it could with the no-win situation that the characters were in. Every time that things seemed to be going well for the characters, there was something that made things go wrong. I was very confused until I started reading reviews and I found out that people were disappointed by who ended up with who in the relationships. That is one thing I will say about this series, is that it was very much driven by the romantic relationships, and that's fine, but for me that's not my preferred fantasy reading experience at this point. And I think that I'd really learned something in reading this series and reading reviews, and that is that I could never understand people getting annoyed about relationship end goals, especially with love triangles, back when that was a huge thing in young adult books, like with Twilight and the Hunger Games, etc. And I think that I've worked out that for me, I thought that like having someone you rooted for was looking at the main character and figuring out who they wanted and whether or not that was a healthy relationship that would work for that main character. And so I was very confused when other people were rooting for other characters, when I'm like, well, that's not the person that she wants, and therefore the relationship wouldn't work because she doesn't want this person, she wants the other one. Unless there was a case where it was a very abusive, toxic situation, in which case I would be rooting for another character. And I didn't realise until like now that when people were rooting for characters, it's not who does the main character want to be with, it's who does the reader find most attractive. And I just never considered this before, so I now know why people were disappointed in this book. I don't get it, but I understand. And so I'm very glad that I now have all of the background info to be able to go into Crooked Kingdom and other books in this sort of wider expanded series with all the prior knowledge from this first one. And I have a feeling that I'm going to enjoy those significantly more than this. Next, I have a very fun read, and that was A Short History of Queer Women. This one just popped up on my audiobook app and I decided to give it a go. I think that this is really not going to work for everyone because it has a very sarcastic, blunt narrator. I also have a feeling that this probably wouldn't have worked for me if it was a super long read either. I think that because of the length of it and with how quickly we went through a bunch of different queer women throughout history, I think that it worked with that short, snappy delivery. And this book gave me a bunch of new people that I didn't know about or didn't know they were queer to look far more into in the future. Up next, I have another one that's in the Grishaverse Shadow and Bone world, and that is The Lives of Saints. So this is a short story collection where it's, how to describe it? Rather than being a collection of stories following characters in the world, I think that it feels more like a collection of stories that people in the world would have come up with in order to like understand more about their religion. That I know sounds very weird, I don't know how else to describe it, but essentially it follows a different main character in every story running into a difficulty in their life and their relationship with sort of praying to or getting help from certain religious figures or saints. And so I could imagine this being like a religious text or a religious set of stories that are told to children, maybe by people in the world, rather than being set in that world. I really don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but I really enjoyed this, and I think that it's a really interesting parallel between how religion is viewed and lent upon in times of hardship and sort of taught to others in our world. And it wasn't a perfect book for me. Again, I gave it a 4, but I still really enjoyed it. Next, we have another comic, and that is A Gentle Noble's Vacation Recommendation, Volume 2. This is such a complicated title. I think that when I read Volume 1, I gave the wrong title on here anyway. And so this is a very D&D style comic with not a lot of plot per volume. I feel like I'm going to be able to explain far more once I've read the entire series. It's about a guy who is clearly very new to the area, doesn't know how things work, people are quite suspicious of him, and he decides to join one of the guilds, and he teams up with someone who typically works on his own and is known for only working alone. I feel like this is more like the setting up of a gay relationship over a longer period of time. I still really enjoyed this volume. I think it's very fun. I love the art style, and I'm interested to see where it goes, but I can't really say much about the plot of this individual novel. Next, I have another one that I have in person, so let me get that. And that is Graceling by Kristen Kishore. So this is part of a series of companion novels. Each of the volumes follows a different main character, kind of like the Cinder series. And this originally was a trilogy, but I have noticed that Kristen Kishore has started coming out with more volumes in the series. This is a beautiful rebranding and recover design. I think that this is the best cover design of all of the rebrands this has had. So this is a young adult fantasy series where certain people are born not so much with magical abilities, but sort of unusual affinities to certain things, and we're following a main character who is graced with, so that's what they call them, the graced with killing, and she has been brought up to hone this skill and be used as a weapon for the ruler of her kingdom, regardless of what she wants or the relationships that she tries to foster. She is regarded as a dangerous weapon, and this book starts off with our main character Katza, the one who's graced with killing, essentially deciding that she needs to escape from under the thumb of the king, and investigating a mysterious kidnapping is how she decides to go about this. I thought that Katza had a really brilliant character arc in terms of learning who to trust and how to trust herself, in accepting help from others, in finding an equal match and finding someone who can challenge her. And I really loved her as a main character, and I'm very excited to see how this series continues, because I do think that the political system is going to be built up a lot. I think there was a lot of setup in here, which I think is going to pan out very interestingly in following books. And next we have a little zine, and that is The Olden Gaze by Queer Kerno. So this one is a zine that I bought in Pride, when we had Pride down in Cornwall, and it is essentially a collection, here it is, a collection of queer history and stories of prominent queer people who have lived or are from Cornwall, and it's part of a collection of zines that seeks to shed light on our queer history and to make sure that these stories don't get forgotten or warped over time by others with an agenda, and I thought this was very interesting. And finally, I shall end on a 5-star, and that is The Language of Thorns, also by Leigh Bardugo, and also in the Grisha verse. So this one is a collection of short stories, again set in the Grisha verse, but this one is far more about individual short stories rather than religion based like the other one. I'm really not explaining this correctly. I'm sure that other YouTubers have done a much better job, but bear with me. So this one I just thought was absolutely brilliant, and I think really confirms the fact that once I get out of the Shadow and Bone trilogy and into other books in the series, I have the potential to really, really love work by Leigh Bardugo. These were just perfect. I think that the art of writing a very good short story was waning, I think, in publishing, and because anthologies and short stories are coming back, I think a lot of people who don't have the knack for it are publishing a lot of short stories where each of them feels really incomplete and doesn't feel like a full narrative. And I think that Leigh Bardugo absolutely has the knack for telling a fantastic short story. All of these were incredibly dark and fleshed out and introduced the magic and the setting without feeling rushed or incomplete. I thought that so many of these were either setting a message like a folklore fairy tale vibe or exploring a character. I just think that this was such an amazing collection. I enjoyed every single short story in here and it was a fantastic read, so I would highly recommend. And there you have it. These are some of the books that I read during this month, so I'll just pause for a thumbnail shot. And I would love to hear about something that you've been reading recently. I will see you in my next video. Did I just forget my outro? And I will see you in my next video. Bye!